Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting episode of Kentik Close-Up, where we zoom in on the latest Kentik features, products, or capabilities. In each episode, our team brings you a focused overview of just one aspect of the suite of Kentik's network observability solutions. I'm Leon Adato, one of the Kentik technical evangelists, and with me today are... Dun-da-da! We've got Phil Gervasi, my partner in crime, and also the director of technical evangelism. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Leon.
And also we have Mike Krygeris, Enterprise Solution Architect, and an all-around amazing person. Welcome to Kentik Close.
It's great to join you today, Leon. It's, we don't get a lot of time together, so
no, we really don't.
It's always nice with the snark coming.
Right, and normally when Mike and I work together, it's because I have a problem that I can't figure out, and Mike has done it like 72 times, and now he has to talk me through it. So I am his burden to bear frequently, at least within the halls of Kentik. So. We have things that we want to talk about. We have a really exciting topic for Close-Up today, but we are whole people. So before we get into that, I thought we would take some time and just talk about who you are, what you do at Kentik, and also what's new and interesting in your life. And Mike, since we don't get to talk a whole lot, I'm going to pick on you first.
Okay.
And just tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So, I got to be the idea guy. Sometimes when there are difficult problems or customers have need creative solutions to some of the problems they have. A lot of times I work with our solutions team under the field CTO to come up with these creative solutions. And a lot of times this is to help people, sort of right size Kentik and get the most bang for their buck when it comes to that. So, those are the type of things that I do, on a daily basis, just to try to help out the whole team as a whole, just to come up with these solutions. And so, it's a lot of fun. It's very creative, and I get to kind of be a mad scientist a little bit sometimes. So, and myself personally, like. This summer hasn't been that great. My golden doodle, I don't know if I told you, but my golden doodle, 100-pound golden doodle, full speed crashed into my wife and broke her leg very badly. So we've been spending a lot of time in the house together. No traveling, no vacations, but she's on the mend, and so hopefully we can get to go somewhere in the fall instead for a nice vacation.
Has the golden doodle been forgiven yet?
Yes. There's I do have a nice photo of the moment they kind of made up. So
okay.
I wish I could share it with you right now, but I wasn't thinking I was going to be bringing that.
Got it.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay. Well, welcome again, Phil. We talk all the time, multiple times every day. But go ahead, tell the audience who you are, what you do at Kentik, and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So, as a technical evangelist for Kentik, what I do day to day is it's similar to technical marketing in a lot of ways, except I think more public oriented and certainly more storytelling oriented, but from a technical perspective. So I was a traditional network engineer for 15, 17 years, something like that, before getting into what I do now. And so Leon, it's been like maybe 4 years since I've been in technical evangelism for 2 different companies now at Kentik. And I got to say, it's taken about that time for me to kind of figure out what that means and get comfortable with the transition. I mean, it was really an identity shift and almost an identity crisis, really, to go from just being someone who turns a physical and virtual wrench and figures out why is this network not working and fixing things and installing things. And I loved it, by the way. It was a ton of fun problem solving, to what I do now, which, like Mike said, is significantly more creative in a different way, of course. Though that, the previous role was creative in its own way. And it's taken me a long time to get comfortable with it, which is odd, I think, because, many, many years ago, I was a high school English teacher, very, very much into literature. I'm very much into music and other things. I like peace and quiet lately, so I love to canoe and camp and things like that. I live in upstate New York, by the way, so I head up to the Adirondacks all the time. Oh, in fact, here's a little personal tidbit. I am going to Ausable Chasm on Saturday with my family. And if you don't know what that is, Google it. It's the neatest thing. I've never been there, but we're going to take a raft ride down the chasm there and check that out. So yeah, and I really enjoy that creative component now at Kentik, being able to interface with folks, being able to do speaking engagements. I do a lot of video, and I do the company's podcast, all a ton of fun. But I get to balance that with still being very, very much a nerd. And whether that's with networking, traditional networking, and talking about routers and switches, but also I get the really cool opportunity to get paid to research really cool, new, interesting technology, like, AI and things like that, and research it really deeply so I can then in turn evangelize it. So that's been really neat, Leon. I really appreciate that about what we do now, and really glad to be here to talk to you about cloud and cloud costs today.
Not only, and I'll mention to the audience that not only does Phil get to research these things, but he also gets to make goofy memes about it.
Yeah.
Phil is, in fact, our chief meme officer here at Kentik, and every year we put out a meme calendar, so you can pick that up. And if you find us at different conferences, we usually have stickers and things for some of the memes, but you can, we'll have all of the social media links in the description below, and you can find and follow Phil for the latest in dank memes, dank networking memes. Okay. With that out of the way,
yep.
I guess we need to talk about some work stuff. So today's close-up is distinctly a adult, not dank meme category, managing costs, and specifically managing cloud costs. Now, for anyone who's gotten that surprise $7,000 AWS bill that they weren't expecting, you already know what I'm talking about here. Yeah, guilty as charged. If you haven't gotten a surprise AWS bill, you're gonna. Spoiler alert, it's going to happen, but it may not be obvious why. So before we get into what Kentik has to bring to the table about this, I want to start with an explainer of how cloud costs can sort of sneak and creep up on you, what happens and how it goes into it. So who wants to kick it off?
Yeah, I guess, I'll kind of get started. And this is kind of like from my own experience at being an administrator in an AWS environment to what I've seen customers deal with. Really what it kind of is like the first time I ever experienced this, I just happened to choose the wrong type of volume for a 1 terabyte drive. And then I provisioned the thing and I thought, hey, I'm going to pay for this and it's only going to cost me X number of dollars a month. And then come to find out, the bill came and it was an additional $5,000, and so didn't get any extra performance out of it. So it just kind of shows you like how easy it is. Like I call it a foot gun. It's the biggest foot gun you can have is a cloud environment, provisioning resources, and not really understanding what you're doing. Fortunately, I'll give credit to the folks at AWS. I called up their support. I explained the situation, and they said, "Okay, we'll give you a mulligan this time." So I was able to avoid a seriously bad conversation with my boss over that. Yeah, I mean, I think there's other, there's other things, like metered services in a cloud environment. What do I mean by metered services? Things like a NAT gateway, right? So you pay a certain amount, like 4.5 cents an hour for a NAT gateway to use one, but you also have to pay for the throughput of that NAT gateway, right? And that's 4.5 cents a gigabyte. And so what happens is if somebody makes a misconfiguration or maybe they make a mistake, so a good example would be provisioned the NAT gateway, and now we're using that to go get to the internet rather than just going through an internet gateway. And most people would think of, NAT gateway to get me to the internet. I NATed on my internal network, and it just cost me the cost of the firewall and the circuit. Whereas with the NAT gateway, that takes on that extra money because there's a performance aspect to those appliances, and that's why they charge more for them rather than internet gateways. So what happens is, somebody does that and they make a misconfiguration and it ends up going out a NAT gateway instead of internet gateway, and suddenly that meter is running, right? And so the first time, the first day, at least, even if you're really, really good at keeping an eye on those costs and getting alerts, it takes like a day for that bill to get crunched together, right? So you don't immediately know about it. So you could be shooting, petabytes of data out that NAT gateway, and it could be going to S3, so they're going to get charged for it, all that stuff. So, basically, if you're not able to wrap your hands around that really quickly, it can end up costing you a lot of money. Is kind of my point. And so that's a hard thing for people to be able to wrangle. That's one of the things that we kind of look at and try to understand for our customers. So that's kind of that's my thing is the metered services, whether it's egress traffic, NAT gateways, transit gateway traffic, any traffic that goes from one place to another that's kind of like has some sort of distance to it or some sort of process associated with it.
Nice. Okay, Phil, anything to follow up with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just follow up with what Mike said, but he's correct. I mean, it's a metered service, so you want to know where your traffic is going, in what direction. You want to know when it's egressing. You want to be able to measure the volume, and then of course you want to be able to track what is that traffic, right? So you need some sort of visibility, some sort of ability to do detailed analysis. I mean, no, you're not going to use Kentik to like literally like get your cloud bill. AWS hands you the bill, but you could there's some auditing, there's some monitoring, there's some understanding that comes with it. What I think is important though, and this is something I learned the hard way many, many times, well, maybe not that many, but enough times to know that a lot of the outages that I've been involved with, some of which I caused, were misconfiguration. And one I remember, I didn't cause it, but I remember that there was all the DNS, it was a DNS load balancing being used. We were sending traffic to the wrong AWS region. Traffic was going where it wasn't supposed to be going. We caught it, we fixed it, not a problem. But ultimately, it's misconfigurations that are going to be the cause of a lot of these problems. So I want to be able to track where traffic is going so I can implement proper traffic engineering. There's other things that we're going to talk about in this discussion today, as far as like identifying idle resources, something that Mike taught me how to do recently with our platform. Really neat. But there are so many things that can impact traffic, and ultimately, other than kind of like the base billing stuff, like the automatic billing things, that's what's going to drive costs and incur changes in cost, unexpected changes. So, basically echoing what Mike said, and just kind of adding upon that, the idea that really when it comes down to it is I want to know what my traffic is doing at all times, what the makeup of that traffic is, and why it's doing that. So there really needs to be an understanding, not just pretty graphs, which are awesome, by the way, but really being able to glean why is this going where it's going and how can I change that and fix it.
Right. And one point I want to layer on top of that is, we're talking about AWS or maybe Azure or whatever, but for a lot of people listening to this, it's not just one provider, it's that you have multiple providers. And I know this comes as a shock to a lot of people, but the cloud providers do not, in fact, provide you with a single bill. That you actually have to deal with multiple bills coming from multiple providers who have multiple different rules about how things get charged and how much you get charged for. And so another one of the problems that we're going to be talking about, or at least alluding to, is how can you keep your arms around the total bill when you have an application or an infrastructure that's based on multiple cloud providers simultaneously? So that's just another point that I wanted to bring out there. So that is how cloud bills can get away from you. But I think a lot of folks, especially folks who haven't maybe been living, with their cloud architecture for very long, or they haven't gotten that surprise bill, they're probably thinking what I did, which was, well, the cloud providers probably have tools built in to do that, right? I mean, it's not like the cloud providers want to shake down their customers and take as much money as they can, you sweet summer child. So can we get into why the built-in tools that are or maybe aren't provided do the job or don't do the job? Like why don't we just use what's there?
Yeah, I can start with this one. I mean, the cloud providers are going to provide some visibility for sure, right? AWS provides some visibility, and you can use it, and that's great. By the way, I'm not going to knock what they give you, but it's going to be missing some of the features, the functionality that I think are necessary, especially if you're in a hybrid or multi-cloud environment. And the reality is, most people are. I mean, there are some like single cloud environments; they're all in. Okay, that does exist. What also is very, very common is having, I'm making calls from my on-premises location to AWS or Azure, whatever. And also this whole multi-cloud thing is not, that's not like a one-off. That's a very, very common architecture. I've worked with many folks over recent years that have a front end in one cloud, making calls to a database and back end in another cloud. That's not uncommon, but which, by the way, incurs cost, right? Because you're leaving one provider going to another provider. So maybe you can optimize that, but you want to know what you're doing. So ultimately, as far as the visibility, that's really where I'm getting at. Like, what is it specifically that's leaving my cloud and going to another cloud? And so once you start looking at this multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, I almost said super cloud, but I know Mike hates that term. Once you start looking at these overall topologies, you can't do it with a single cloud provider's visibility tool. Not to mention that there are bespoke requirements with regard to specific industries where you're looking at things that maybe that provider doesn't give you as far as visibility. So I really think that one of the main things that, especially at Kentik, that we offer is that when you start to look at like all of the metadata that we add into it, and we start to get an overall picture, an overall understanding of what's going on. Why is it that when I swing, from data center A to data center B, and I'm swinging my BGP peers over, that my latency to Route 53 and my DNS resolution times get hosed? Like, what's going on there? How do these things relate? So that's something that I've noticed. And are we really talking about the build and buy conversation here? Is that really?
No, well, somewhat. I mean, I guess when it comes to the when it comes to the CSPs, like they're cloud service providers, right? I say CSPs. It's really about they're not really great at building these observability solutions. They're really kind of checking the box. Like, they're providing logging, and they conveniently have object storage where they can put it in, and then maybe have some sort of query capability that's wrapped around that, like Athena queries. And but really, it's not a delightful experience. And while you can send some of your Azure logs into AWS and query them, it's not something that that the average person wants to deal with. In sort of like we were saying, whether it's a free tools, building your own observability platform, that ends up kind of being like, it's free like a puppy, not free like a beer. Like, there's a lot of care and feeding involved in building out a free stack, right? So the people that are really dedicated to doing that are no doubt really brave and probably very smart to be able to keep that stuff up and running. But that's not the core thing that most businesses want to be doing. Kentik that's our core business, right? But we don't want to, just like we don't want to be a cloud provider. We're a SaaS, platform, but we're not a cloud provider. There's kind of a difference there. So it's just like allowing yourself to be able to stick to your core competencies and actually use the tools that will help you solve these problems across these different environments. So that's kind of my take on that.
Now, ultimately, that's the key here, is across those environments. Am I right? I mean, if you are building out a tool on your own that incorporates all the stuff that you're ingesting from on premises, your VXLAN in the data center, and your routers and switches and your Palos and all these things, and then you're sticking in routing tables so you can understand why there's latency between these two ASN hops, whatever, all of this stuff. That's how applications are delivered today, right? I mean, I'm sitting here on my computer talking to you both, and there are, out of all the applications I run on this machine, I don't know, 3 that are local. Like, one of them is Notepad, I think. Almost everything is over a network, and it's not a network down the hall in an IDF, like on an old PowerEdge server or something. It's like somewhere else in the world. So if you're going to build something, you have to keep that in mind. You're ingesting from all those sources. So yeah, you're going to have bugs to deal with from multiple vendors. You're going to have new product and code releases to deal with from multiple vendors, as there's a new Cisco code version, a new Juniper code version. You're going to have to deal with the same thing with regard to all the cloud vendors. Now, there is like a base that you could do on your own, and many people do that. But there is a cost associated with it. So you talked about free as in puppy and free as in beer. There are certainly organizations that free as in puppy is okay. They have the staff, the resources, the time. There's some reason why that works for them. Although I will say that I've had certain instances where I had sufficient free beer where I still continued to pay for it later. So it wasn't entirely free. But all jokes aside,
always a cost.
All jokes aside, when that's not your business is to, you're selling a widget, you're providing some kind of digital product. That's your core business. And so this becomes a cost center, and you don't want to keep sinking more staff and 30 developers, because you're talking about a data analysis problem. You're not talking about getting a bunch of CCNAs to fix this for you and to do this for you. You're talking about getting data analysts and folks that truly understand networking and programming and data normalization and all of this kind of stuff. Really neat stuff. But something that's certainly a little bit more, it's not trivial. It's not a trivial undertaking, is what I'm saying.
Right. And just for, again, for context for those who are watching this and wondering, well, why don't the cloud providers do a better job or whatever? I just blogged about this recently. We'll have a link for it in the description. But it's important to keep in mind that the primary interface that was imagined for cloud services is not the GUI that you see. The GUI is almost an afterthought, that it was really intended to be an API driven, a programmatically driven interface where things are happening very fast on a programmatic basis, not is there going to be a human clicking buttons, getting into things and moving things around. That was the whole idea of infrastructure as code, is that. So why would an organization building a API driven, code driven infrastructure want to build a monitoring tool for humans to go look at along with it? So that's another reason why that might not be there. And just because, both of you have mentioned the free as in puppy, free, not like beer, I just have to mention that, if you're wondering about that phrase, it goes back to the early days of open source, where software could be one of three things. It was free as in beer, meaning here's a beer, enjoy it, or free as in speech, which is, freedom is not free, free as in speech, which you have to, work for, or free as in a puppy, which the puppy might be free, but feeding the puppy and taking care of the puppy after definitely racks up. So for those people who aren't familiar with the concept, there it is. Or as one of my former colleagues likes to say, Linux is only free if your time is worthless. So that's another way to look at it. Okay, so moving forward, though, we've talked about what the cloud cost, why cloud costs happen. We've talked about why the built-in tools may not be sufficient. So what is it exactly that Kentik brings to the table? What is it? What's our point of view? What is it that we want to make easier or better about all of this?
Yeah, I'll start with this one as well. I am a big proponent of the fact that we are cloud vendor agnostic and that we ingest all of this information. I've mentioned on-prem, I've mentioned public internet, and of course in this conversation, multiple public clouds, right? And SaaS providers as well. We're ingesting it into one platform. Yeah, that's true. You can have a dashboard where you look at just interface metrics or just like flow. It's not that like everything is literally in one dashboard unless you want it to be. But it's all coming into one platform. So you can slice and dice information and really get an understanding of what we care about, like usually an application, some sort of service or application. And so if you think about it, like developers and folks that are putting stuff into Kubernetes environments aren't necessarily thinking about IP addresses and that kind of thing. They're using application tags and whatever kind of IDs to denote their applications and their workloads. And so if I can track a flow, which might have different source and destination IPs and probably the same ports over time, using my tags, I have some sort of understanding of what's really happening. And where traffic is going, why traffic is going, but it's more than just from destination to source. Now you could start to look maybe perhaps in a time series, different things that occurred at the same time that also spiked, like you saw 99% memory utilization or CPU utilization on a particular router. And at the same time, you saw an incredible jump in latency at a particular remote location. I mean, these things can kind of, that's a time series. It's not causation. It's just correlation, right? They are different. But nevertheless, it's all in one platform. So Kentik, I think one of our biggest draws is or benefits is that we are cloud vendor agnostic, and you can be a multi-cloud organization or an organization that utilizes multiple clouds, yet just log into Kentik and be able to get all your information in one place, which is nice. It's more than nice. It's awesome. And so I think all that metadata that we add to the data set is also very valuable as well. I mean, I mentioned a few like the global routing table that we ingest and all the stuff that you might put in like from your IPAM. I mean, it's a database, so ultimately you could, in theory, add a lot of other information as well, like from your CRM.
That's exactly the right point. It's
okay.
It's context, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like when people are able to see the kind of questions they can ask, it's because of that additional context, right? If you look at a standard VPC flow log, right, it's going to have some basic information. It's going to have the account number. It's going to have a source and destination IP address. It's going to have a VPC ID. But all of these things again are kind of speak to the to Leon's point. It was like the machine. The machine recognizes them, but you have to look it up somehow. You're not going to be able to look at that and say, I want to understand like what this is. So for instance, it's not very easy to look at a flow log and understand that, like, I'm going from US East 1 to US West 2, and build, a traffic profile, or build a report on that, or even sometimes, even if it's leaving the cloud environment. So, like, what we're doing is we're taking all of that metadata. So, like, we're taking instance names, we're taking tags off of all of the things. We can use those to add additional columns in the database. So we start with this really, like, kind of a skinny record, right? When we talk about observability, people talk about, skinny records and skinny data and wide data. So what we do is we take this data that's kind of skinny, and we make it really wide with all of the context. So we can scrape the cloud provider's APIs, and we know exactly what that's related to, and we can add that to the data. So we do that, and we put these really wide records into our database, and then people can go and query those. So now you have a lot more context, whether it's specific to your business or in the cloud environment, like those principal ideas, like regions and that sort of thing, that are important for billing purposes. All of that information can be used to try to glean where your money is going, or what, who's using it, what department might be using the most transit gateway traffic, or pushing the most through a transit gateway or load balance or something like that. Yeah. So that context is really the valuable thing. Whether it's like from a forensic perspective, say you have a breach and you need to do an investigation, and you want that MTTR to be really low. Well, the more context you have, the quicker you can try to figure out how to mitigate it, and then assess the blast radius. Because I know what machines, maybe if they're trying to do a lateral movement, what machines they were trying to do it, and what the roles are of those machines. And so, those are the things that make it really, really valuable to be able to answer these questions really quickly when you're trying to do some sort of an investigation.
Well, at this point, I think we've made our case. I must see this. I cannot wait another minute. Who can show me what's going on? Do we have a demo ready?
Yeah. I can. I definitely have that shared out right now, and so hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes. We can.
And so what I'm showing you here is just a representation of an AWS environment. And so the way that we've done this in our environment, in our product, is we're taking all of the metadata from all of the accounts that you have or that you want to onboard into the product. And then we're kind of taking all of that metadata and putting it together. So in this context, we could have 50 accounts here, right? And these are representations of entities within all of these tenancies within AWS, and we can see what the communications are between these different entities. So, you could have different, VPCs or entities within your environment that are talking to each other. You don't have to worry about switching from one account to another to understand like how the traffic's flowing. And this is just kind of showing me, an availability zone. We've got traffic going through NAT gateway and out to the internet. And this is kind of telling us where that's going. So there's a couple of different ways we can drill into this and take a look at this information. One would be, I could go and click on this, and this gives me the ability to, take the traffic that's associated with this NAT gateway, and I can drill into it. So what I did here is I just pulled up a report, and these are the two NAT gateways we were just looking at in that map, right? And so this is just showing me the traffic that is going to. We can see that they're NAT gateways, and they're filtered. I have the traffic filter for NAT gateway, but we see that this is NAT gateway type, and here are the gateway IDs. And so this just kind of gives me an idea of what is going on right now. We can see that there was an increase in traffic, but the other thing that we see here is these little dotted lines. These are kind of the shadow of Ghost Pass. This is part of how we look at baselines of traffic, and so this easily lets me check and say, is this normal or not, right? And we can also build baselines based on these. So I could take this report and I could say, all right, I want to know if it goes outside of this baseline by a certain amount for a certain amount of time, right? That would be a common thing that would happen in in an event where suddenly there's a lot more traffic in the NAT gateway. And I can add different columns to that, and I can show, I'll just go to this, I'll just jump over here, this tab, and this kind of shows you, here's a different representation of the same data. I've added some things like here's the source availability zone. I have things like these other things. The traffic profile here. Here's one that's kind of important. And so it's the traffic profile tells me like where it's coming from and where it's ultimately going to. And in this case, it's leaving the cloud environment to outside, and outside kind of means the internet. If it was going to an internal resource inside your corporate network over a direct connect or something like that, it would say cloud to inside. Or if it's the other direction, it would be inside to cloud. And so this gives you a really good tool to be able to filter on traffic that is egressing the cloud, which again is going to rack up costs, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about here. Another thing that we can see here is I've got a public cloud service. So one thing that we also do for enrichment, and this is part of that wide record I was talking about, is all the cloud providers have information about cloud services and their IP ranges and all that stuff. So we just take all that data, and every single flow that we take in, whether it's on-prem or in a cloud, it is checked against this and annotated based on that data set. And so this makes it really easy for you to understand, hey, I'm in US East 1, and it's going cloud to outside, which means it's going to an external IP address that's not inside of your network, but it's still going to EC2 in the same region. This is not optimal. This is kind of like, I guess maybe some people might call that hairpinning, but it's kind of is going out there. And if this is going, you probably still want to add some more context to it and say, all right, is this going to one of my instances, or maybe it's going to some other place? But generally, you want things like this to be going through VPC endpoints, right? Just to keep it inside the house to do that. So those are things. If it was S3. Some of those things where you in the same region, you would also want to know about that. So those are things that make it really easy for you to kind of identify, slice and dice, and understand how things are going in a cloud environment. So that's kind of why I wanted to show that a little bit. It just becomes very easy for you to do that if you want to jump off from any point in the product. And this is the part of the products that for those tuned in, we call Data Explorer, and it's kind of the heart of Kentik. All roads lead to Data Explorer because basically all of the data that you're seeing that's getting queried out of that is in the middle of what we call KDE, Kentik Data Engine. It's a specialized database that's designed specifically for flow, and it's nice, really fast, and it was built specifically to deal with time series flow data.
Right.
Huge scales.
And before we jump off of this screen, I just want to point out for folks who aren't as familiar with Kentik, two things about monitoring observability in general. One, if you can show information like on this screen, you can alert on information on the screen. So anything that you're able to display is also something that you can set a threshold on, and then you can alert. But the other piece specific to cloud cost is that going back to something that I think it was Mike who said earlier, it bundles up your charges at the end of the day. You won't know, you cannot know down to the minute how much you've spent. However, because we are watching the traffic egress, we can tell you down to the minute how much traffic you've gone. And at that point, cost is just math, right? We can tell you that you just in the last 5 minutes transported a terabyte of data, and that's going to be $9,567 or whatever it is.
Also, because you don't want false positive, right? Sometimes you're going to have spikes in traffic. That's just a fact of life, right? What you want to do, what you really want to do is you want to minimize that noise and avoid false positives like that. So by creating things that are using baselines. So we're looking at what do we know historically about this? And I want to say how far outside of a set of do I want to, if it goes 30% over what's normal for 20 minutes, or an hour, or however long you want to do. So we can set those knobs so that we can minimize that, but still get notified when things are so far outside of normal that we know that there's going to be a serious problem. So that's a very that's a good. I'm glad you kind of brought that up, the alerting side of it, because that's really important, because once you start getting alert fatigue, like, you're just going to stop ignoring. So you're going to ignore everything after that. So that's a really good point. Yeah. And there was one more thing I wanted to show that Phil mentioned. I think it's really interesting, and not a lot of people really have an awareness of the functionality, at least in AWS flow logs. I'll just reset this to a default query, and I'll choose AWS, so I'm using the right data set. But in AWS, there is we want the logging status, right? And so in this logging status, you'll notice that there's something called no data. So what does that mean? So like okay means okay. Skip data actually means, hey, I didn't actually get any data I dropped data. So AWS is just saying, hey, we lost a log somewhere. Usually there's not a lot of these, but the other one is the no data one. That's the interesting one that I wanted to talk about. So I'll just include this in the query. And then the other thing we can do is look at the, I'll say, the observing interface, because there isn't a lot of data that's associated with this. So if I go in and take a look and say, of course I'm having a hard time finding it. Observe. Yes. Okay. Oh, interface ID.
Demos are hard.
Yeah. I'm always looking for E&I. So my brain is stuck on E&I. So this gives me the ability, and maybe I want to change this to like flows per second, but this just kind of gives me an idea. So I'll look at the last hour of data and see which one of these is showing me the most no data. So periodically, if an E&I in AWS is not doing anything, basically this is like a beacon in log form that says this thing is idle. And so you can see here which ones are the most, are sending the most idle, and they're sending the least amount of traffic. They're quiet the most amount of the time. And so this can be indicative of, basically you have resources provisioned that aren't doing anything. And so this is a really good place where you can kind of go back and investigate a little bit more as to like, why is this doing it this way? Like maybe I want to, drill into that E&I and see what else I can find out about it. But I don't want to get too far into it, but I wanted to just point that out because I really think this is an underutilized log type that people should be using a lot of.
Right. You can dig into it and turn that thing off. I hate to sound like somebody's father, but why'd you leave the room with the lights on?
That's exactly it.
or re-provision resources into different locations and for different purposes. So it's not necessarily turning things off, Leon, but you're right. But ultimately, just the goal is to find out what's not being utilized and then optimize your utilization. So like we've been talking about this whole time, you're most efficient with your resources and not paying for things that you don't need to pay for, right?
Right. And that really takes us to the last part of any close-up episode. I fondly call it the Kentik close-up lightning round. So what's the most important thing from your point of view that folks who are watching this conversation should take with them? And I'll start off and say, and just emphasize once again that, it's only free, whether it's Linux or the cloud tools or whatever. It's only free if your time is worthless. Otherwise, you are going to be spending. There's always a cost. The bill always comes due, as Mordo said in Doctor Strange. So unless you want to own that for the rest of your career or your time at this company, it may be better off to ask someone else to take up that burden. So that's the point that I wanted to emphasize. But Phil, as my partner in crime, why don't you, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I guess if I were to choose one thing that I really want folks to remember as a final thought, it is that it's really important to remember that Kentik unifies all of this telemetry from a variety of sources, variety of formats, telemetry types, all that into one place. And that's just so useful for any kind of enterprise organization that is juggling multiple tools, that has resources on premises still, that has resources in various public clouds, that has SaaS providers that they're using, even for mundane like productivity tools like Microsoft 365, things like that. Maybe that's not mundane, I don't know, but you're using all these resources that are completely distributed. So you're also relying on the public internet. So just having all of that telemetry coming into one place, and then you can start to tie those data points from different places all together in a nice wrapper of context, like Mike said, like an application tag or a security tag or a project ID, whatever it happens to be. In the context of today's conversation, maybe you have a project ID. So now you can kind of wrap all that stuff up from multiple clouds, and you have charge back to the department that's running that project, just as an example. And it's not just for cloud. It's not just for cloud cost. It's certainly for anything, for tracking application traffic across this entire spectrum of devices and networks that we don't own or manage. And I really feel like this unified approach that we take, it almost speaks to more of a data analysis endeavor than it does like network visibility. So we say we are the network observability company, but if you look at this under the hood, what are we doing? We're kind of a data analysis company, and we're providing you the tool to do that analysis and chase that information, and to, like we like to say at Kentik, answer any question of your network using our platform.
Love it.
Yeah.
All right. Mike, bring us home.
Yeah, no, I'm going to say that again. Context. So having a lot of context around the data that you're looking at. What does this mean? What is this connected to? How are they connected together? And then also as a baseline, having the context of what the normal traffic patterns are is also hugely helpful in not chasing your tail around, or running into my wife and breaking her leg. That's a terrible joke, but it's been a while, so we can laugh about it now. But yeah, no, it's just going to keep you from having to do a lot of research to understand, like, well, is this normal, and what is it? If you already have that data that's baked into the data set, then you're going to be a lot better off, and you're probably going to be home, at the normal time, instead of trying to do research in the wee hours of the night. So that's the context is everything.
Nice. All right. Well, I want to thank you both for taking some time out of your busy days and sharing some of your knowledge with everyone here at for sharing it with the close-up audience. Thank you again.
All right. Great. Well, thank you guys too. It's been great talking to you, Leon. Hope we get to do it again soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Thanks very much.
I also want to thank all of you for watching this episode. It is no exaggeration to say that there is an overwhelming amount of bingeable content options, and we here at Kentik appreciate the time you've carved out for us. If you'd like to get notified when a new episode drops, remember to use the subscribe button below. For Kentik Close-Up, I'm Leon Adato.